should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
Paul, I want to transition back to the whole Tennessee story involving Greg Schiano. I think it's a miscarriage of justice that he's being subjected to this because, simply on, somebody was told that he may have known, even though that person supposedly who told Coach McQuarrie denied that and Greg Schiano denied it. And for that to be the reason that this man was denied a head coaching job at Tennessee, I find to be incredibly alarming and egregious. What were your thoughts about that?
I completely agree. Stephen A., I am one that believes very strongly in fans should have a right to voice their opinions. I do that every day on a radio program where fans get probably a bigger voice than any other show in the country. But for an angry mob on Twitter to cost a man his reputation and a job is just beyond the pale. And I don't want to blame anonymous people. Ultimately, it comes down to the athletic director at this university. He is the one who caved in to social media yesterday. He caved in to state legislators who didn't have a single fact other than a smear campaign being orchestrated, deciding to undo what was already done for students to idly show up on campus. I mean, that's great. That's what college is supposed to be about. But nobody had the facts. And that's the tragedy of this situation. I think Greg Schiano is probably fortunate because had he shown up at a press conference today, he would have then been in the spotlight. But he should have been given the job. By the way, he was the third or fourth choice. It wasn't like he was the one that everyone went after. But it is one of the most shameful things I have witnessed in a very long time.
I think some of the backlash may be because these Tennessee fans think that they are Alabama or one of these programs. Right. What do we have a retread for? We should have a top guy. How much of that do you think feeds into it, Paul? Because Tennessee has to consider these things before they make the hire. So they had to expect something. They just got more than they wanted. I don't get it. How much of it is the self-view of Tennessee fans, do you think?
That's exactly right. This all started with John Gruden. John Gruden, because his wife was a cheerleader at Tennessee, because his son goes there, everyone in Knoxville thought he was going to take this job. He was never going to take this job, and they fell for that. And so when Gruden moved out, then they put their hopes on other people, especially Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen kept Tennessee waiting for 3 days while the Florida situation cleared up. And finally, after Chip Kelly turned Florida down, after Scott Frost decided no, Dan took that job. And Schiano was a backup. That's all he ever was. And it was held against him primarily because he wasn't John Gruden, he wasn't Chip Kelly, and he wasn't Dan Mullen. So you're absolutely right, Max. This is a program that used to be at the epicenter of college football, but has not been legitimate in about 10 years, has gone through one loser after another, and now you have to ask the question, who in their right mind would want to go to the University of Tennessee?
Paul, you mentioned Chip Kelly. I want to talk about that. So UCLA hires him. Do you think he's the right guy for that job?
I think he is. I think Chip made a good decision not going to Florida. Florida is a pressure cooker. Florida is on the same level as Alabama, and I don't claim to be an expert on Chip Kelly. I've spent some time with him this year, like everyone at ESPN, and he just seems like he's more comfortable going elsewhere. It's in the Pac-12. It's his comfort zone. It's on the West Coast, and the expectations aren't to win the national championship every year, and I think that would have been the problem at the University of Florida.
You think Florida grabbing Mullen was the right move?
Florida with Mullen, is that what you're asking?
Yes, is that the right move, Paul?
I think it's a good move because Dan Mullen was part of Florida's last reign of terror. When he was there with Tebow, he was there with Urban Meyer, and he understands the terrain. I mean, it's interesting that the university could have hired Dan Mullen 3 years ago, but they chose McElwain instead because there was some bad blood there. Apparently that bad blood has gone down the drain pretty quickly after Florida got turned down by its first two choices.
Well, let me ask you this question. When I think about my top 4 teams in college football right now, in my mind, it should be Oklahoma, Clemson. I think Auburn should be in there, and Wisconsin. Do you see any scenario under which it can be justified that Ohio State, with 2 losses, home to Oklahoma, blown out on the road to Iowa, should be one of the top 4 teams in the nation in position to compete for a national championship.
Stephen A., I don't see a single scenario that should put Ohio State in there. It was a year ago that Ohio State fans were arguing that winning the Big Ten shouldn't matter, that the resume should, and now they're in the opposite position. And remember, they beat out Penn State last year. If it comes down to Ohio State in Alabama, I really don't see how you can put Ohio State in there. We're 5 weeks removed from a 31-point loss on the road to Iowa. I mean, that's unforgivable. I mean, listen, Alabama looked terrible Saturday. I haven't seen Alabama play that badly since Nick Saban's first year. They were clueless at times, but they were still at Auburn, a team that has now beaten 2 number 1s in a 3-week period. So, I mean, their resume is pretty good. It's not as good as it could have been if Florida State had a big year. But and that's what they're paying for. They're paying for Florida State losing Francois and having an average year.
Paul, another coaching question here for you. So Texas A&M fires Kevin Sumlin, and they're already willing to offer Jimbo Fisher a lucrative deal. But if you're Jimbo, would you take this?
I probably would, and I say that because he's been at FSU a long time, and sometimes these marriages just don't go very well, and I sense that he's ready to move on. Remember 2 years ago, Molly, he nearly took the LSU job. Remember that coup d'etat about to throw Les Miles out? So I mean, he's been looking around. He's worked with the AD before at LSU. I think he's ready to move.
Paul, we talk about sometimes the Nick Saban effect with these coaches. A lot of coaching carousel going on, and a lot of high expectations. Are they unrealistic? There's only one Nick Saban.
There is only one Nick Saban, and everyone thinks they can be great. And that's the problem with college football, but it's also what fans want. Fans don't want to be 6-6. They don't want to be 7-5. So they bring a coach in, and then they fire him a couple of years later. I'm not all that upset with that, because a lot of these coaches who are fired, I mean, of the ones who have been fired, Kevin Sumlin has probably done the best job. But, you know, he didn't kiss up to the boosters. He didn't kiss the ring. And like Charlie Strong last year, he got fired this year.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Kevin Sumlin, because that's where I was going. I wanted to know, A, do you believe his dismissal was justified? And B, where do you think, or who do you think should consider?
You can say, well, if you take out Johnny Manziel, his record is pretty average. Well, it isn't great. But again, he has been in that SEC West, and he's had to face Saban every year. He beat Saban his first year, hasn't done it since, and that's really what got him fired. But in the end, yeah, I think he's probably going to be happier away from A&M. At some point, it just doesn't work, like I said, with Jimbo. But, yeah, I think his name has already come up at Arizona State. It's come up at other places, and I will be shocked. Tennessee would do well to hire him, by the way. I would be shocked if Kevin Sumlin doesn't land a pretty good job.
There were very recently, in a very, like, how many news cycles ago, Jim Harbaugh is going to be given a lifetime deal.
Yeah.
They want to give, and now all of a sudden it's like, should Jim Harbaugh stick in the job? Where do you come down on all this?
Well, I mean, listen, Harbaugh is a good coach. I mean, considering what's going on elsewhere, Michigan's probably pretty fortunate to have him. The problem with Harbaugh, Max, he just doesn't live up to the expectations. When he showed up there 3 years ago, everyone thought he was going to slay Urban Meyer. He has not. He's lost 3 straight. I don't see what's going to change next year. And the biggest disappointment is he just can't find a quarterback. And he's losing all the big games, all the games that matter. And for all of his charm in the offseason, he wins February, March, and April. He just can't win in November. So I don't know why Michigan would give him a lifetime contract. Knowing Jim Harbaugh, he will eventually play out, and he will eventually go back to the NFL. Whether it's this year or next, he's leaving there at some point in time soon.
Paul's forgetting one thing.
And that's where I'm going. I don't understand why Michigan would be talking a lifetime contract.
Well, they were clicking with Wilton Speight
into why they would consider giving this man. I like Jim Harbaugh, don't get me wrong, but you're right.
Yeah,
he's underachieved.
The season went down after he went down.
He himself established. It's not like anybody else put that on his shoulders. He put it on his shoulders with the attention that he drew to himself, and he's come up short. Why are they considering this?
I don't know why. I think they're reacting to media reports that he's going to the NFL, and whether it actually happens or not, I don't know. First of all, I mean, who in their right mind would give anyone, other than maybe you, Stephen A., a lifetime contract? I mean, the bottom. I mean, by the way, I don't run ESPN, but that would be a good idea. But in college football, I mean, Saban and Urban are probably the only two that can withstand the test of time. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, he hasn't done anything. I mean, he really hasn't. I mean, the record's okay. It's not embarrassing, but when you're 0-3 to your biggest rival, I mean, you know what the stats are. Rich Rodriguez was 0-3. He got fired not long afterwards. And at some point, you have to beat Urban Meyer, or you cannot be taken seriously.